Forged carbon fiber. It's not really forged, that's just a marketing thing. Like how engineered wood sounds better than we mashed together a bunch of scraps of wood that we found on the floor. Forged carbon fiber is the engineered wood of the composites world, which is fine. Engineered wood is awesome, but it's also the cheapest. And you don't usually show off that you have the cheapest thing. Like you don't normally see houses that are really nice but have oriented strand board accents. This makes it weird to see so many expensive cars with forged carbon fiber all over them. It does look neat in small pieces, and there are places where it makes sense. And I found one on my race car. So I forged some carbon fiber, and probably some other stuff. My race car needs stability, aerodynamic stability, and for that we will use a vertical stabilizer. The original design of this was pretty basic. It's just an extruded airfoil shape with an angle up front. And this would probably work, but it doesn't look super cool, and what's the point of having a race car if it doesn't look cool? So I looked at some subsonic airplanes that I thought not only looked pretty good, but also probably had some aerodynamic analysis work done on them, and I copied their design. A lot of planes have this intermediate transition into the stabilizers. I'm not entirely sure what this does, but I do know that the junction of wings to a fuselage are often areas of high drag, so I'm guessing this is a drag reduction feature. And guessing is enough engineering for me. It also looks cool, so we'll make it. If we were just doing this simple design, we could make this pretty easily. We could 3D print an airfoil, wrap it in a continuous blanket of fiberglass, and call it a day. But with a more complex shape, the fiberglass can't be continuous. I'll need to cut it and add extra pieces and overlaps, and it becomes a lot harder to get a smooth surface without making a mold and getting more complex. So I'll split this into two pieces. The top part here will be made the easy way with just a 3D print wrapped in fiberglass. Carbon fiber, actually, since I have some of that lying around. And this bottom part is going to be made with forged carbon fiber. To make this, we will need to have a 4-piece mold, 2 sides, a top, and a bottom. The bottom will just be the contour of the body in this area. The sides will be 2 pieces of MDF machined on my router, and the top piece will be a press. It will have the contour of the top of the part, but be extruded an inch so we can press it down, thus forging the carbon fiber. It doesn't actually forge it in the correct sense of the word. It pushes resin out, giving you a better ratio of fibers to resin, but you do the same thing when you use a vacuum bag or even a squeegee. Basically, if you're not squishing out the extra resin, you're not doing your composites right, so forging is just a way to do composites. So we will machine these 4 molds, combine 3 of them, fill the cavity with carbon fiber and resin, and then mash it all together. We'll start with the top and bottom pieces. These need to be about 3 inches wide. This is forged carbon fiber, the material of choice for supercars everywhere, so we will not cheap out on mold material. We will use the finest quality 2x4s that are sitting in my backyard. The sides are going to require larger pieces, so I cut up some of that fancy engineered wood, MDF specifically. These need to be 2 inches thick, so I glued together some 1-inch MDF I had and threw it in the router. I did make a slight error in running this, which left some dimples on the leading edge of the mold, but we can sand those off in the final part. These did require some amount of mold prep, which I hate. MDF will soak up lots of paint, so I used a shellac-based primer and then sanded and recoated and repeated a few times. I followed this up with the clear coat, and I could have waxed that and applied mold release there, but instead I used Teflon-coated mold release film. There are 2 things to know about this stuff. 1, it is the composites cheat code. It's amazing. It sticks to your mold, and with just a little bit of cutting and contouring, you have the perfect mold surface, with no mold release and minimal preparation. The part will fall out of the mold if you use it right. The second thing you need to know about this is that you can't have it. I also can't have it. It's been sold out for months. I had to borrow this piece from a friend who bought a big roll several months ago. The 2 sides are aligned with some dowel pins, and we made sure to screw them together with some screws that we will definitely not forget about later when taking the mold apart. For the bottom piece, we just used some of this red release film attached with spray adhesive, and for the top, we just used packing tape. This stuff works really well on small, flattish surfaces. I'm planning on mounting the vertical stabilizer to the car using 1 long bolt running through the spar in the middle. This spar will be a thin wall tube that goes through both the top and bottom parts. The bottom part will have a slightly larger thin wall tube that the spar will run through, and another one in the front just to keep the stabilizer from rotating. So we will need to locate 2 thin wall aluminum tubes inside this forged part. Aluminum and carbon fiber right next to each other might be a problem, but only if we take this out somewhere really corrosive, like a salt lake. But that is a problem for future Matt. The problem for current Matt is locating these 2 tubes. I milled some holes into the top and bottom mold pieces, but since we will need to have one of those pieces off to fill the mold with resin and carbon, I made some 3D printed spacers to hold the tubes in the right place temporarily. I printed these in 2 pieces and glued them together. After they were printed, I noticed they didn't line up with the holes, and after lots of double-checking measurements, I realized they shrank in the printer after the print cooled down, so I had to reprint them 0.7% longer so they would shrink to size. My original plan for this was to fill this thing up from the top and then use the top piece to forge it all together, but I didn't think we could fill this area in the front up here, so instead we decided we would fill it up from the bottom with the intention of screwing the bottom mold on when we were about 95% full. Then we can press the top in to do the final squishing. So we initially screwed the top on the mold with some washers as spacers to keep it offset about 1/2 inch. Now, the correct way to do this is to measure the volume of your part and then weigh out the carbon fiber such that 60% of your final part will be carbon fiber and about 40% resin. Another less better way to do this is to just pour in resin and mash down carbon. This is the approach that we took. Forged carbon fiber is made with short strands of carbon tow. Basically, if you took some carbon fiber weave and chopped it all up into pieces about 2 inches long, you'd have what you need to make some forged carbon. I don't have chopped up carbon tow, but I do have a carbon weave sitting around. So we busted out the scissors and turned our weave into chopped scrap. After a while, we were running out of chopped carbon, and cutting more woven carbon fiber was difficult and time-consuming, and it was wreaking havoc on my scissors. We'd already chopped more than we wanted to, so we scooped up some of the carbon strands from the floor. Floor dirt may not be the best reinforcement, but you know what's pretty good? Metal. You can actually buy aluminized carbon fiber. It's not really any stronger, it's there for looks, which is on brand for forged carbon fiber. So let's shove some metal shavings in there. Zach over at Jerry Rig Everything sent me one of his knives, which was helpful in making the mold. Unfortunately, it got resin all over it, and it pretty much ruined it. So I put it in with the carbon. And I figured why not follow it up with some other YouTuber merch, a pin from the Autopian, a keychain from Bad Obsession Motorsports, and a Mr. Beast chocolate bar. I know some of you are going to be salty about this and leave negative comments, but don't worry, I preempted it by printing out negative comments from previous videos and adding them in with the carbon. It was starting to fill up, but we ran out of carbon and needed to cut more. But first, a lunch break to enjoy some delicious ham sandwiches. And then we finished it up with more chopped up carbon and whatever else was lying around. A rag, a brush, just whatever. After it was all filled up, we attached the bottom piece, or we tried to, but it turns out we were overfilled. So we took it back off, pulled out some carbon, and then squished it back on. We removed the washers from the top piece, screwing the bolts down, forging the carbon into one forged piece of forging. This nicely squished out a bunch of resin, improving the fiber to resin ratio to what I can only assume is perfect. The next day, it was time to remove the part from the mold. Unfortunately, sometime in the night, the heater had switched off and the resin on the outside of the mold was not cured, so I did not have much confidence that the resin on the inside was cured. So I turned the heater back on and gave it another day. And then it was time to remove the part. The threaded rods we had put in were pretty stuck in there. This was kind of expected since we couldn't really keep resin from getting into them. Fortunately, I have an impact. The second rod did not want to move at all, not with hammers, not with vice grips. The last rod had the nut stuck on with resin, but not this one. So we welded the nut on, and then got the longest breaker bar we had, and then broke the weld, and then welded it again, breaker barred it again, and impacted it out. The bottom was the next to come off. This one was difficult because the aluminum rods I had sticking out the bottom, these are there to locate the stabilizer to the frame of the car, but with the help of some clamps, we got it apart. The side molds should have come off super easy with that release film we used, but they were stuck together. We pried and prodded and hammered in wedges until we remembered the two halves were screwed together. So we unscrewed them and it came right off. And the top mold came off with just a little bit of leverage. The part looked pretty good all around. The mold release film left a pretty decent surface. There were unfortunately some dry spots and air pockets. I know some people are going to point out in the comments that if we had done a proper forging process, we would not have air pockets in the carbon. But I would like to point out that if we had done a proper forging process, we would not have a ham sandwich in the carbon. Speaking of, and this may come as a surprise to most of you, but adding the ham sandwich may not have been the best idea. There was not a resin shell on the outside. You could just feel and smell ham, which is probably going to be a problem in the future. We painted on some extra resin to get the air pockets filled and to wet out the ham sandwich. Unfortunately, the bread kept getting dry. It was just sucking up resin, and the ham was still wet and would just shed resin away. I did eventually get a coat of resin over it, but it's just not going to work. And so I was faced with an issue that I think we've all faced at one point. I may have to dig out the ham sandwich from the forged carbon fiber vertical stabilizer. But that is a problem for future Matt. Oh god, it is so gross. Why do I do these things to myself? Oh, I remember, it's because it's hilarious. I dug out most of the sandwich, but I did leave some deep in there, so there is still a little forged ham sandwich in this vertical stabilizer. It is a little ironic that I had to dig out part of the good enough sticker, and also the comment that just said incompetent. I didn't put it back, but I think the part speaks for itself. Also, there is now a hole through my stabilizer, which is not aerodynamically ideal. I could have just jammed this full of carbon fiber and resin, but I thought, why not drop some weight by filling it with foam? I sprayed some expanding foam in there and added some more YouTuber merch, this time a laser cut sticker from Xylofoxlin, and also that messed up end mill that I was using the last two videos to side cut with the drill. I smashed the part back between the two side molds and waited an hour or so, and then I used the grinder to cut away the foam from the outside. This way I could fill the pocket with actual carbon fiber. That's right, woven carbon fiber patches. So this part of the stabilizer is actually a foam core carbon fiber composite. The nice thing about that mold release film is that you don't have to do a lot of sanding and finishing work, but since I am an idiot and decided to add part of a pig carcass to my part, I had to recoat all of this stuff with resin, sand it all down, and try to make it smooth. I filled in most of the pinholes, but I kind of stopped caring after a little while. I am done sanding. I am done with this part. Now on to the top part. To make that, I 3D printed it slightly undersized, draped some carbon fiber around it with some peel ply on top of that to get a nice surface finish, let the resin cure, peeled off the peel ply, cut it to size, and that was it. That was significantly faster. Maybe you should have done the whole thing like this. But one more thing, a coat of paint. I used 2-part epoxy paint, which will hopefully be enough to protect the fact that I sanded straight through the resin in some areas. I was going to use gloss paint, but I went with a matte clear, because when this thing gets moving, the paint back here will be Superfast Matt. Also because it hides imperfections, and let's be real, this is one giant imperfection. But it will do its job. Overall, it was a success. We forged carbon and some other stuff, and we made a part that will vertically stabilize the race car. All while looking totally acceptable. Also, if anybody is missing a 10mm socket, I think I found it.